Hey, everybody, this is Brett Ingram, and this is the optYOUmize podcast, the show that helps entrepreneurs build their dream business and dream life. Today, we're talking with James Robbins, mountain climber, best-selling author, award-winning speaker, and small business growth expert. I'm super excited because entrepreneurs and business owners are always struggling to grow. So strategies and tips are always welcome. So with that, welcome, James, and thanks for joining us.
Brad, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm super excited as we were talking beforehand as well. I got a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about, but can we start off with your background? I'm interested to know your personal story. How did you start your career? I know as a kid growing up, you were in the Rockies, but can you give us a sense of how you grew up and how you started your career?
Yeah, I grew up on a small cattle ranch in the foothills of the Rockies. Pretty simple life. Wanted to become a film director, but I was from a small town where people said, "Ah, you can't do that." And I ended up going into ministry. I became a preacher, which was never in my top 100 things of that I wanted to do. But life just sort of opens doors sometimes. And I was doing that for a number of years, and over time, I began to feel a certain restlessness there. I think maybe it's my entrepreneurial nature, also some things with church culture, at least in the church that I was in, that I didn't like, and began to feel a lot of frustration. And that's when I started thinking, like, is there something else I can do? And that's when I was following John Maxwell at the time, who had been a preacher and now had a leadership company. And I thought, oh, maybe I can do that. And so that's really where it started, was just me going and speaking at a conference on not-for-profit leadership. And then, that just led one thing to another. And, it's been a long 20 years or so now doing this.
That's fascinating. I love John Maxwell, by the way. I was first introduced to him, his work, when I was actually in a sales company, and the guy that ran the sales company, he was ironic. This is so ironic because the guy who ran the sales company was literally terrible leader, micromanager, like basically ruled through fear. Anytime that you said anything to him, well, I could just strip you of your business. I could do this. That was his whole MO for everything. And yet he had us sit and listen to John Maxwell. I'm like, this is the total opposite. John Maxwell, Law of the Lid. I mean, I don't know if you listen to your own lesson here, but you're driving people out the door if they're any good. So, but I love John Maxwell. I think he's brilliant and really insightful. Has great stuff to share. So, all right, I want to get into some of the business stuff in a minute, but I have to ask you about your mountain climbing. So, what drew you to that, and what is it like?
Well, because I grew up in the foothills and I could look out our window and see the Rockies, I would just see them every day. And then as I got, my father used to take me out into the mountains. As I got into my college years, friends, we would go and scramble up peaks, nothing super big. It wasn't until I was in my 30s, sort of hitting a midlife crisis. This is right around the time that I started thinking, like, I need to do something else. So part of that journey was I had met a guy named Wally Berg, who is, a great American climber, and he's climbed Everest, I think, 4 times. Anyways, I got to know him, and they were running guided trips to places all over the world. And I would go and visit him, and he would say, "Hey, we're going to, Kilimanjaro in Africa. Why don't you come?" And I was always like, oh, "I'd love to, Wally, but I can't. Either I can't afford it or I can't take the time." And 2 months later, I'd be back at his house, and he'd be like, "Hey, we're going to Mount Elbrus in Russia. You should come." And I'd love to, Wally, but I can't. And one day, I was driving home, and I realized, you're just saying the same thing all the time. Like, all the different reasons why you can't do this. And I went back out another time, and he said, "Hey, we're going to go climb the highest mountain in Bolivia." And he said, "Why don't you come?" And that's when I said, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And I handed over my credit card to pay the deposit. And, I was on a preacher salary back then. So this was a big undertaking, but there's nothing like putting money down that gets skin in the game. And that was the real first high altitude mountains that I began to climb in South America.
So you started off with something pretty high altitude right out of the gate. Was uh, was there a moment like since you've been climbing? Was there ever a moment that you were scared or felt like you were in real danger, like something's going wrong here? Or because here's the thing, like I'm fascinated by it. I think it's amazing, but it's also I don't like heights. So the whole idea is terrifying to me at the same time.
I am deathly afraid of heights, so I get you there. That's why I don't rock climb, the guys and the men and women that go up extreme faces. I don't do that. Honestly, the most dangerous things I did were long before I did the high altitude stuff, when it was just me and my buddies scrambling up peaks west of the city, because we just didn't know what we're doing. And, you'd be climbing up some, narrow gully and some rock rips by past you. And you think, wow, that could have killed any one of us, and just didn't know anything. When I was doing the high altitude stuff, yes, the heights got higher, but it was more safe. Not that it felt safe, but the guides had anchors in and you're roped in, and but I still had to get over my fear of heights. And I remember we were climbing this mountain. It's called Pequeño Alpamayo. It's in Bolivia. It's just beautiful. It's this pyramid peak. It's just kind of this knife edge ridge on that goes all the way up the side. And I got to the base of it and I just looked up and I thought, there's no way. And I remember feeling so afraid, and I thought, like, I can't do this. Like, maybe I could say that I feel sick or something. Like, here's me as a 30 something trying to like fake an injury, like I'm a middle schooler trying to go home. And eventually I was like, nah, you just got to do it one step at a time. So
I mean, that's amazing. But yeah, look, I mean, obviously the rock climbing stuff is nuts. We were out at Devil's Tower in South Dakota, and those guys, I mean, they fly up the outside of the thing and back down. I mean, by the time you walk halfway up the trail and come back, they've already made it to the. I'm amazed by what they're doing as well. It's just that whole thing is crazy to me. But as a family, we always watch Amazing Race, and I love it. But I've always said I could never go on it because the heights. I don't mind eating the food. I don't mind trying all these other things. I love different cultures, but yeah, the heights would do me in. I think it's terrifying. So let me ask: do you see parallels between climbing a mountain and business or entrepreneurship?
yeah, absolutely. Because I don't know of a mountain I've been on that's especially anything high. I don't know a mountain I've been on where I haven't wanted to quit many times along the route. And to me, that's a lot like business, or maybe that's just me. But when I think of some of these mountains, we did this mountain, that expedition I signed up for was Mount Sahama, and it's just a slog to the summit. And there were so many times I wanted to quit. And I talk about this in one of my speeches. I even got to the point where I thought, well, I don't want to quit because I'll ruin it for everyone, but I'm hoping the guy in front of me quits, because if he quits, then I have to go down and I get out of this. It just you you're never really battling the mountain. You're just battling yourself. That's what climbing a mountain is. It's like you're gonna, Brett, you're gonna climb a mountain. It's like you're going to go to war against yourself. And at the end of the day, you have to find a way to beat you, right? To beat your fear, to beat your procrastination, to beat your pain and fatigue. And yeah, I think that's why I will still climb now with my daughter, but I don't even necessarily enjoy it. I enjoy it once it's done, but even you get to the summit, and of course it's a great feeling, but the journey to get there was just difficult.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, of course it is. So I'll tell you a funny story. When I was in high school, I ran cross country, and there's some interesting parallels. Clearly, no heights, but one of the interesting things that I discovered really early on about cross country and distance running is that it really is just about a battle with yourself, because the whole time you're running with this pack of kids, and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I don't know if my lungs can take this. I don't know if my legs can take this. I think I need to just stop. I gotta, I just want to give up. But like you said, if everyone else keeps going, I got to keep going. I can't stop either. So unless he stops, I'm not stopping. And so we had this one really long loop that our coach would give us only once a season. It was 11 miles out. And then we would do sprints at the bottom of this place called Powder Hollow. And then we had to run the 11 miles back. So everybody would ask him from the first day of practice of the season, which day is Powder Hollow going to be? Don't worry about that. Just do that. Like, because everybody was trying to mentally prepare for it. But every single thing that he gave us to do, everybody would always ask, well, is there going to be more after this? He's like, I'm not going to answer that. Give this 100% and then worry about it. But I will tell you, one of the great things that came from that, and I was not a great runner, but one of the great things that came from that is a feeling of self-reliance. The ability to understand that, look, if I can run 10 miles, then even if my car breaks down miles from home, I could get there if I need to. I know it because I've done it. And there is something about the power of that belief that's instilled in you when something goes from theoretical to actual and you've actually done it before. I mean, with the 4 minute mile, right? Nobody could do it. They said somebody would die if they ever ran that fast. It's not humanly possible. The year Bannister does it, 3 or 4 other guys do it within a year. And it's just, it is remarkable how collectively we can work that way, yet individually as well. So that's very cool. But I could see why, the fatigue has got to be. I've done hiking. I was in scouts for years, and even long hikes and we didn't do any mountains. So
Well, Brett, what you said is that's so profound in terms of our limits and pushing past them and what it does for us. It gives us more of a history, right, to draw back on. And kind of back to your question that I don't know that I'd adequately answered about the parallels. I think the mountain is so physical and tangible, and at least for me in business, the mountains are not as much physical and tangible as they are inside of me, and the internal fears that you got to get by sales, or walking into a you walk into a factory and they want you to take this place and turn it around, and you're like, okay, and you're not quite sure how to do it. You've got to trust yourself. So I have on my desk, I have this ball. You probably can't see it, but inside
a
of
little
it,
bit.
yeah, inside of it is this dragon, and I have it on my desk, and I look at it every day when I start work, because it's my fears that are just looking at me. And I just look back at it and just go, you are not going to win today. I am going to win. And then that's just a reminder that that's always in front of me, at least for me. Right. I've not yet got to the point where, you know, sales calls are just, oh yeah, I can just do that in my sleep. No, I got to gather myself every time to go and do that. And so much about succeeding in business, I think, is, can you overcome the fears that you have inside?
Yeah, I love that lesson, and I think it is super true. I don't remember which one it was, but one of the really, really famous female singers with an amazing voice. I don't know if it was Celine Dion, but somebody had said, they asked her, well, do you ever get nervous when you go on stage? I mean, you're in front of all these people, but you've been doing it for so long. Every time. Every time. And you're thinking to yourself, every time you're a superstar, everybody loves you, everybody loves your music, and yet nonetheless, every single time, because there is that anxiety, and I think what you said is so important. It's not that you try to create a situation with the absence of fear. It's that you recognize the fear and you say, I'm doing it anyway. I don't care. I know this is uncomfortable, but I'm going to push through this. I'm going to make this happen. And I'm going to make this work. And when you go through that process, that builds up your belief and your resilience and your ability to take another step and do some more. And I think that is such an important lesson for everybody just in life in general, but certainly everybody in business, because not every day is going to be like a positive day and a great day. You're going to have some tough ones in there as well, and you just got to fight through those. They will make you stronger. So yeah, I think that's great advice. So um, about your career itself, I'm curious to know, when did you decide, or how did you decide to start focusing on leadership and performance? Was it because of your exposure to Maxwell or something else?
I wish it was something that sounded like a great story. To be honest, at the time, I was just like, how do I make some money that doesn't take a lot of time? Because I need to do this on the side. I was trying to think of starting a side gig. And then I found out, oh, there's some of these people that get up and do speeches and they make more than I make in a month and I'm on stage all the time as a preacher. So I thought, yeah, maybe I could start speaking on stages. And then it was like, well, what should I speak about? And I just started going through all these topics. And I thought, well, I already teach leadership in a not-for-profit setting. Why don't I just do that? And so that's really where it started. It wasn't like I want to change the world and help leaders lead better, though I do. But originally, the start was just, how can I make some money on the side? So that's how that started. But leadership made the most sense, of course. And there's one thing, and I had a chance to have lunch with John a number of years ago, and I'd asked him this question about, especially for those who've had to lead in a not-for-profit setting or even in a church setting, you really cut your teeth, especially on leadership, because you have typically a small staff that are paid, but then you have this massive group of volunteers. You can't fire them, you can't kick them out, like unless they've done something egregious. There's always relationship challenges. You got to keep this group together and happy. And it's really where you sort of get your PhD in leadership. But having said that, coming out of that and going into the corporate world and teaching leadership for years, I carried this insecurity with me. Like, what do I know? What do I know about this oil and gas company? And I had all these fears and insecurities of this imposter syndrome. And it took me a while to realize that a lot of the leaders you're teaching, you do have way more experience than they do, and just in pure leadership. And leadership's leadership. It's regardless of where you want to plug it into, what sector you want to put it into. It's about, can you influence another person for the good, for something positive. But still, that was an insecurity that trailed me for years.
I mean, and that happens to everybody, right? I mean, people that are, I talk to a lot of business owners, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and particularly ones that are in where they are the product or the service, coach, consultant, those kinds of things. And it's shocking to me when I look at pricing for some of the things that they're looking at, it's almost always low. When I look at, what they think they need to offer, and it's shocking to me because if you are an expert at something, it's we just automatically assume, well, of course everybody knows this. I mean, this is my sphere of influence and knowledge, so everybody else is going to know it too. But when you're talking to somebody who doesn't, it's totally different. I mean, we've paid for our kids to have coaching for this, coaching for that, right? Soccer and things like that. And it's like, it's not like the things that they're teaching them have never been discovered before, right? But they're better at it than I am. They know more than my kids do. So you put them in that and you trust that it's worth it. And so it is amazing to me how many people have that imposter syndrome, me included. Look, when I started this podcast, I'll tell you a story. This is funny. The thing that held me up, and I'm an action taker, so I'm not a guy that hesitates a lot. When I make a decision, I'm really good at follow through. I work my tail off. But the funny thing is, I had the idea and the impetus to start the podcast. And I got all the stuff ready. And then I said, I can't do this. I mean, I'm not the best business person that's ever walked the planet. I don't know more than everybody. I haven't made more money than everybody. I don't have all the and then one night I was laying in bed, and thankfully this was a very short period of time. I was laying in bed and it just clicked in my head. And I said, I don't need to be the expert. I need to share the journey, right? My job isn't to give everybody all the answers. My job is to share my personal experiences and journey, bring other people on that have expertise, experiences, and journey, and share all of that. So we all feel like we're in this together. And I think that for me, I had that imposter syndrome about trying to start a podcast until I eventually realized I don't need to be the expert. So yes, I know more than some. I know less than others. That's okay. So you speak all over the world now. And obviously you sort of did it, which is hilarious, as a way to make money, because most people, I mean, what is it, like death and public speaking are the top two fears of people's lives. So
For sure.
were you ever terrified about it, or, you just naturally, because you were a preacher, it was easy?
Now 100% terrified. So Like I said, I had some pretty small town roots. I grew up this redheaded, freckle faced, introverted kid, couldn't get a girlfriend. I just grew up like I'm broken. There's just something wrong with me. And I avoided speaking in public because every time I had to do it in school, I just totally bombed. And even when I got to college, I went to a class one time and they said, "Hey, part of your final grade is everyone has to do a presentation up front." And I'm like, "Heck no, not me." And I walked across the campus and withdrew from the course. And it was not long after that, I was still in college and I was attending this church that a lot of young college people went to. And the preacher came to me and he said, "Hey, we'd like you to get up on, we need one of the college kids to get up on stage and share for 5 minutes, what you're learning in your Bible and in life. And we want you to do it." And I was like, I felt like I couldn't say no to the preacher. But for the next 3 days, I moaned and whined about it. And there was this distinct moment. I still remember it to this day. I'm sitting on the sidelines of a football field and I was whining about this. And then it was literally like a voice in my head just said, "Hey, for once, for just one time, could you not be so worried about what people think of you and just go for it?" And I said, "Okay, sure, I'll go for it. And if I'm going to fail, then let's at least fail big time and make it a fun story." And so for the first time, I prepared something, and then I get up there. I'm super nervous, but I thought, okay, I'm just going to go for it with high energy. And so I share this stuff for 5 minutes about what I'm learning. And when I got done, all these people came up to me at the end and said, "Hey, you need to do more of this." And that was a turning point for me. It was like all the sticky notes I'd put on myself that said not a public speaker. They didn't fall off that night, but at least a couple of them began to fall off. And eventually, as I got into ministry, it was, "Hey, we need you to get up front." So it was a constant battle to get to that space. So for anyone who's terrified of getting up in front of public, you're in front of a big crowd. Listen, I totally get you, but I'm here to tell you, if as people say, if I can do it, you can do it. Really and truly, there are some rules to that game. You just have to learn them.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the other part of it, right? In my experience, and I've had sort of a varied experience in public speaking because I actually had classes in college about it and things like that. And so I've spoken in front of small crowds, medium sized, never a huge crowd. But for me, it was never the crowd size. It was always my comfort level with the material. If what I had to share was something that I feel passionate about and confident about, I found it a lot easier to be able to be effective. But the other thing that was really great is one of my college professors in graduate school. She had us record ourselves, and this is before digital, so you had to watch it back like on the thing. But she had us record ourselves when we presented a few speeches, and then she would literally go through the video and make notes and all these things and tell you these things. But what's fascinating about that is if you're willing to be vulnerable, if you're willing to accept feedback and criticism and things like that, understanding it's designed to make you better, it's remarkable how much of an effect that can have. When you're so terrified of being told that you stink at something that you don't even try it, it's impossible to improve. I've learned so much along the way with those things that I like to feel like, while I'm certainly not at the peak of it, I've developed so much more than I was when I was younger, because I remember standing up doing my first book report in front of a class and, shaking and kind of reading off the page. And I'm like, yeah, this isn't an effective way to give a speech. What are you going to do? So do you have tips? You have a ton of experience as a public speaker. You've shared stages with, some really, really big name speakers. And are there tips that you can give us if we're preparing to speak on stage?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it depends on what's the goal. When I look back at it now, probably 80% of all my business that I generate comes because I spoke somewhere or did a workshop or did a webinar or did a live online. So if you're not using speaking as a way to lead gen, I'm telling you, you're just leaving a ton of money on the table. And when it comes to speaking, more than anything, it's about structure. So if you sign up for a public speaking class, of course they will teach you some structure things, but then they're also going to overload you with things that don't matter, like expressions and body language. And there's a time and place for that, but not when you're first starting out. It really is get the structure right, because think of it in this way. All of us have read a book at some point that really pulled us in, and then, kicked us out at the end. We didn't want it to end, but these are just written words. There's no body language there. And it had everything to do with the structure. So the first thing is understanding who your audience is, of course, and then figuring out what is the one thing you want to say. And that took me years to actually learn that lesson. How I learned it was we used to go after church maybe once a month to visit my brother-in-law. And I always hated these moments because he would say to me, "What was the sermon about today?" And he said, in just one sentence. And then I would it forced me to think, yeah, what was the sermon about today? Because I felt like, well, I can't sum it up in one sentence because, I had these 3 points or these 4 points, told this story. He's like, no, 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 one sentence. So finally I'd get it down to one sentence. And then, he would make the joke, oh, great. So I didn't need to go then because I told him what it was about. But there was a real practical truth in that. And so when I coach speakers now, or business owners who I'm trying to help them, use speaking to get leads, is you've got to figure out, like, what's the one thing you're trying to say? Because that's what people are going to take out of the speech with you, of the speech with them, right? So that's the first thing. What's the one thing you're going to say? And then whatever that point is, how will you wrap that in emotion, right? How will you charge that? Because think of it in this way. One of my main keynotes on leadership, even though I tell a ton of stories, I walk through these 9 engagement drivers, like there's a lot of content in the talk, but there's really one point. And the point is that leadership isn't easy, but yet it doesn't have to be complicated. And it's when we do the little things, the right little things consistently, day by day by day, right? That's really what the speech is. Of course, there's a lot that hangs on that, but if I just got on stage and just said, hey, here's the sentence, it's not going to have any impact, because this is what makes speaking so powerful, is that you're able to take a concept or a point, wrap it with a lot of stuff that infuses emotion, unlocks thinking, changes how people think or believes about something. And that's what really opens up and creates change and transformation. So it's no different if you are, let's say you're a coach and you have a webinar and you're trying to get somebody to sign up for your coaching. Well, you got to have an idea about what are some of the objections, what are some of the things going on in how they think. Like one belief might be, well, I can just do this myself. And you've got to be able to, through your presentation, just dismantle each one of those, but do it in a way that they don't even realize that it's happening, right? And so when you can design a structure like that, then you can make a lot of mistakes in the delivery of it. That's not so important. You don't have to be this charismatic, speaker. Sometimes that's actually the worst thing you can do, because it can erode authenticity. So that would be the other thing. And then the last thing I would say is that, there's nothing more powerful than stories. And I know we hear this all the time, but back before anyone was talking about storytelling, I would remember I'm just cutting my teeth. Like I'm preaching on a Sunday, and then on Tuesday I jump on a plane, I fly somewhere to go give a speech to a bunch of executives. And I remember one time I'm at this event, and keep in mind to have all these insecurities, right? About what do I know about leadership? So I would bring in all this like data and research and all this stuff. And I would start, and to me, I studied psychology in school, so this was cool stuff to me. And so I would start telling them this study and Stanley Milgram this, and, Philip Zimbardo that. And people's eyes just glazed over, and now they're looking out the window. And then all of a sudden I'm like, and so then one day I'm on the golf course, and this angry golfer comes up to me, and now everyone locks their eyes back on me. And I learned in that moment, people don't want to hear my content. They just want to hear my stories, because at the end of the day, we think our stuff is so important, but people's brains are just assaulted with information. And so what a story does is it gives people like, here's a break. Here's a break from life for a moment. I mean, why do we watch shows on Netflix, right? It's just for a break from life. And so stories create that break from life. They also drop the guard a bit of the brain. And a story well told is a little bit like the Trojan horse, right? The Trojan horse, you bring it to the city walls. The city walls are the people's minds, and it's new and it's interesting, and we open the gates and we let it in, and then the people inside. That's really the truth, the point of your story, and that's how you get it into people's minds.
Yeah, that's really well said, and I think it rings so true because I've first of all seen story after story about people that were giving speeches, people that you recognize as great public speakers, and they tell the same thing where when they tried to give a lot of content and they've got all the stats and the facts to back it up. You're right. People's eyes glaze over. They're like, ah, okay, I'm at an insurance seminar, and then conversely, you tell a little story and all of a sudden, woo, like everybody pays attention. It is disarming and it's engaging in that way. And I think it's also memorable. So if you want somebody to remember something, if you wrap that in a story, it's far easier to remember. I mean, look, the very first, before written word, we had stories that were passed down generation to generation orally. That's the only way they could survive. And I think that is so powerful and amazing. To your point about structure, so I was in an insurance company when I was younger. And the fascinating thing about this company to me was we would go to union members' houses and we would do this presentation about insurance. And the typical insurance client is, white collar, six figure, like all that kind of thing. And these were general, like union members of all different. I mean, some of them making just a few bucks an hour, but the idea was this company had this sort of idea for the way they did it. And what was amazing to me is the way that we did our presentation was we had 3 pages of single spaced type and you had to memorize it. And when you memorized it, what you realized if you decoded it at all is that's exactly what it did. It took people through a journey. It knocked down all the dominoes of every objection they'd have along the way. And when you get to the end, they're like, okay, where do I sign? And it literally worked like magic. And you didn't need to be letter perfect, like you said, because there were people that would go out there and they would butcher it, but the spirit of it was there. And when they got to the end, the person was still interested and wanted to get. So that is, I mean, that's great advice for anybody that's looking to speak. And I think it's very important. The structure too will also help you feel a little bit more comfortable about what you're going to be doing. So you're also an award-winning author. One of your books, 9 Minutes on Monday: The Quick and Easy Way to Go from Manager to Leader, was also named Business Book of the Year from one of the publications in Canada. So can you give us a sense of what that is all about?
9 Minutes on Monday is a leadership framework, and it operates under the premise that, again, leadership is actually the basic things. That's the fundamentals done consistently. It's a little bit like, how do you get six-pack abs? Well, we don't need a lot of new research. It's just the fundamentals. I don't have six-pack abs. Like, if you punch me in the stomach, you will not hurt your hand. And it's not because I don't know how. It's just I don't do. And leadership is the same. When it comes to engagement, like what drives people to give that extra discretionary effort to really have their heart in your company and to be working for you, not just for the paycheck, but because they're really behind the mission. Well, there's different drivers. And these drivers are like needs, like on psychological needs and emotional needs. When they get met within us, it creates this engagement, this higher motivation. So anyways, there's 9 engagement drivers that I teach in the book, but where the title comes from, 9 Minutes on Monday, is at the end, you have this simple template and it's just 9 questions. And so what we do is we will get managers we'll teach them this, whether it's through a keynote or through our courses online. And then on Monday morning, once they've learned it and they've learned the tools, they sit down for 9 minutes and they pull out this piece of paper and they just answer 9 questions and they make a small micro commitment for each one. Like, who am I going to connect with on my staff this week? Who am I going to help grow? Who will I reward or recognize? Who will I give feedback to on their progress? Who will I help link purpose to pay? Who will I help experience some autonomy today? And then there's a couple more about the team. So it's sort of like, did you ever read the book First Things First by Stephen Covey?
Yes.
So that influenced that work because I remember reading that First Things First and this idea of creating in a sense, a template that you would do in the morning that would guide your day. It's like that, but for leadership. And so what it does is it creates intentionality because what happens is we're all so busy that it's not that we don't it's not that we don't appreciate our staff. We just don't think to appreciate our staff. So sometimes we just need a little bit of help to go, hey, you should appreciate your staff. Oh, yeah, that's right. And let me do it. It's honestly as simple as that. But I think that's what's made the book and even the program, so popular over, 15 years now, just because it's simple and people,
Yeah.
they read it and they're like, oh, I can do this. And then they do.
Simplicity is absolutely powerful. That's fantastic. So, all right. So where can people find your products, your services, connect with you?
Thank you for asking. They can find me, jamesrobbins.com. It's two B's and Robbins, jamesrobbins.com, or find me on LinkedIn and let me know that you heard this interview on Brett's show.
Awesome. Thanks for that. All right. I have one last question I have to ask because I ask everybody and I want to know what you have to say. That's what's your number one tip for success as a business owner or an entrepreneur?
My number one tip is this: you have to go all in on yourself. It's so much just about how much do you believe in you. And when you stop believing in you, you just recommit to believing in you. And as you do that, everything else will take care of itself.
Awesome. That's great advice. Very succinct, but very powerful. As always, James, I mean, you're killing it. So, all right, with that, it's just about time to wrap things up. I want to thank you again so much for sharing all your insights with us. Visit jamesrobbins.com for his books, podcasts, and some great leadership tips. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And as always, remember, no matter what you want for your business and your life, don't compromise, optimize.